Here, Blue, you good dog, you. Well, I shouldered my gun and I tooted my horn, gonna get your possum in the new ground corn. Old Blue barked and he went to sea, he cornered a possum in a simmon tree. Here, Blue, try that with me. You good dog, you. Here, Blue, you good dog, you. Here, Blue, you good dog, you. Now, old Daniel Boone had a dog named Blue. He was a good sniffer. And everywhere Daniel went hunting, he always took Blue with him because, you know, dogs can smell 300 times better than human beings. Well, one time, Daniel and old Blue were out in a big old field, tall grass, and they were hunting after some kind of animal. I can't remember which it was, but they were hunting after some kind of animal, and old Blue was leaping up high so he could see over that tall grass. Well, now, as he leapt up high, he did not know that right underneath him was an old sawmill blade, just lying there in the grass, rusty but as sharp as ever. And old Blue, he came down and that sawmill blade cut him in two. Front end split off from the back end. Daniel looked down and there was Blue, his best hunting dog, lying there in two pieces. But old Daniel was always prepared. He had some tree sap in his pocket that he saved for occasions just like this. Worked just like super glue. He slapped a little on the front end. He slapped a little on the back end. He held them together. He prayed real hard and he counted to 10. He counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Old Blue was all back together again. He was all back together again. He barely missed a heartbeat. He barked a couple times. Whoop, whoop. He licked Daniel's cheek. He was all set to go. Well, he was almost all set to go. You see, there was a small problem. Daniel was in such a hurry to get Blue back together again before he died. He made a slight mistake. Maybe some of you can figure out what he did that was the problem. My name is Jon Sundell, and I'm originally from way up in New York, but I've been down south for 50 years now. Came down in 1971 to East Tennessee because I was used to playing all these old songs from this part of the country, and I wanted to get kind of a little closer to it. So I'm going to play you some old familiar songs to start out with. Some of you, if you don't know the songs themselves, you'll certainly recognize that sound. It was very popular in the 1930s in particular, when the songs that had been folk songs in the hills began to be recorded, and they became the popular songs of the day. And one of the most instrumental groups in that process, probably the most instrumental, was the original Carter family of Sarah A.P. and Mother Maybelle Carter. And they recorded all kinds of songs. They recorded some 300 or so songs on those wax discs that they were making. This was maybe the most famous because a little later in the 1940s, they broadcast out of Texas all the way to Canada. And this was their theme song. Though the storm in its fury raged today, crushing hopes that we cherish so dear, cloud and storm will in time pass away, and the sun again will shine bright and clear. And it's keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side. Keep on the sunny side of life. It'll help us every day. It will help us every day. It will brighten all our way. If we'll keep on the sunny side of life. I think somebody recognizes it. My grandfather's clock was too tall for the shelf, so it stood 90 years on the floor. It was taller by half than the old man himself, though it weighed not a penny weight more. It was bought on the morn of the day that he was born. It was always his treasure and pride, but it stopped short, never to go again when the old man died. 90 years without slumbering, his life seconds numbering, but it stopped short, never to go again when the old man died. Well, there was a famous recording session back in, in Virginia, where the Carter family first recorded. What they did in those days was that the recording companies up in the Northeast were discovering that there was an audience in rural areas, and so they were sending scouts out with these portable machines. And they would set up someplace and they'd put out an advertisement for folks to come who would play that style of music. They did the same in black areas, looking for blues. Well, there was another fellow who was there for that same recording session. He was a man who had been working on the railroad as a brakeman. And I don't know if he had ever performed professionally before, but he sure did a lot afterwards. And his name was Jimmy Rogers, sometimes called the father of country music. And the Carter family kind of went off. They were the roots of all this bluegrass and folk style. And Jimmy Rogers was kind of the root of the country music that now has become an electric style. But he only performed for 7 years. He was suffering from tuberculosis the whole time. And sometimes you never would have guessed it when he was singing. And this is one of my favorite songs of his. This is called Mother, the Queen of My Heart. I had a home out in Texas, out where the bluebonnets bloom. I had the sweetest old mother, how happy we were, just we two. One day the angels called her, that's a debt that we all have to pay. She called me close to her bedside, and these few words she did say: son, don't go drinking and gambling, promise you'll always go straight. 10 years have passed since that parting, my promise I broke, I must stay. I started gambling for pastime, at last I was just like them all. I bet my clothes and my money, never dreaming that I'd ever fall. Ah-dee-o-lay, oh-dee-o-lay, oh-dee-o-lay, oh-dee-o-lay. One night I bet all my money, nothing remained to be seen. All that I needed to break them was one card, and that was the queen. The cards, they were dealt round the table, each man took a card on the draw. I drew the card that would beat them. I turned, and here's what I saw. Well, I saw my mother's picture, and somehow it seemed to say, son, you have broken your promise, so So I tossed the cards away. My winnings I gave to a newsboy. I knew I was wrong from the start, and I'll never forget that promise to Mother, the queen of my heart. Adi-o-de-lay, o-de-o-lay, o-de-o-lay, o-de-o-lay. But I thought of a story that I tell from Lebanon, from the Middle East. There was a farmer who was returning from the market one day. He was tired. He'd spent the whole day out in the market selling the goods that he worked so hard to raise. And behind him was walking his donkey that carried everything, and he was pulling them along, and the two of them were just kind of trudging along. And standing by the side of the road were two thieves. And one of them said to the other, says, I know that guy. He is not very smart. In fact, he is so foolish, I could steal that donkey right out from under him and he wouldn't know the difference. He stepped in real quietly. He took that rope off of the donkey. He put it on his own neck and he pointed for his friend to lead the donkey away. As soon as that donkey was out of sight, that first thief, he stopped, jerked the line, and the farmer turned around. And where there was a donkey a minute before, there was now standing a man with that rope around his neck. He says, who are you? And where's my donkey? Well, says the fella, I know this is going to be hard to believe, he says, but I am your donkey. You're what? He said, I am your donkey. What do you mean you're my donkey? He says, well, it's kind of a long story, but basically he said, you see, I was a really bad boy. I was always getting in trouble with my mother. I was always getting in trouble with everybody. And my mother couldn't get me to do anything. I wouldn't do anything she wanted me to do. And one day she said, you are so stubborn. You are as stubborn as a donkey. I wish that Allah would turn you into a donkey. I became a donkey, and I've been a donkey ever since. Until just a few minutes ago. I guess Allah figured that I'd finally learned my lesson, and he turned me back into a human being, and here I am. He said, I'm sorry for any trouble. So I guess I better be going. Well, the farmer said, wait a second. I feel really bad for the way I've treated you. I want to give you something to start in your new life. Well, the next morning, the farmer went to the market to get a new donkey. And don't you know that he saw that donkey standing there and he looked awful familiar. It is you, he said. It is you. He got so mad seeing his donkey there. He said, I can't believe it. After all that one day, and you have been so mean that your mother has turned you back into a donkey. On the subject of donkeys and mules, I don't know that we think about it that much. Of course, we've got the donkey. It's the one that carried Jesus, and the donkey has been doing great service for many, many years, and so have mules. But they do, they say, have a temper. They do have a temper, and when they get mad, they're known to kind of kick. There's a famous old-time song that bluegrass musicians sometimes play called Kickin' Mule. That's your part. Want to try it? Whoa, mule, whoa, mule, I say, I ain't got time to kiss you now. This mule done run away. Went to see that mule this morning. He met me at the door with a smile. He back one ear, kicked one eye, and took me half a mile. And it's whoa, mule, and it's whoa, mule, I say, That mule, he is a kicker. He's got iron back. He headed off a railroad train and kicked it off a track. And it's whoa, mule, whoa, and it's whoa, mule, I say. I ain't got time to kiss you now. That mule done run away. I figured, since this is going to be an audience of mostly women, glad to see two men there, but this song will be good for you guys as well as the women. But this, there's no doubt about it, this one is favoring the women. It's an old folk tale that someone along the line put into a song form called Old Daddy Grumble. And unfortunately, I'm sure you guys know women have not always gotten the respect that they deserve, especially in the workplace. But this farmer was under the impression that he was doing a lot more work than his wife was. Well, she said, we'll just see about that. How about you and I switch jobs for a day, and we'll see how we both do. And so that's what this song is about, called Old Daddy Grumble. Now, it hasn't got a chorus, but it's got a little repeat of the last line, which is a lot of fun, and I hope that you'll sing along with me. Now, I am amplified, right? And this is amplified too. Okay. Old Daddy Grumble, he did say, as sure as the leaves on the tree, he could do more work in a day than his wife could do in three. That's your part. He could do more work in a day than his wife could do in 3. Well, old Mama Grumble fetched her grip and she went out to follow the plow. The old man took that milk bucket down and he went out to milk the cow. The old man took that milk bucket down and he went out to milk the cow. But old Tiny hitched and Tiny stitched and Tiny cocked her nose. Tiny give the old man such a kick that the blood run down to his toes. Tiny give the old man such a kick that the blood run down to his toes. Then he went down to feed the pigs that stood within the sty. Stove his head on the old barn door and his brains begun to fly. Stove his head on the old barn door and his brains begun to fly. Well, he swore to the east, swore to the west, he swore to the rising sun. He swore it'd been a mighty long day and he wished his wife would come. He swore it'd been a mighty long day and he wished his wife would come. Now come all you men, both old and young, that lead a married life. Here's the part you gotta listen to, gents. All take a warning by this tale. Never find fault with your wife. All take a warning by this tale and never find fault with your wife.
What is that instrument?
This is a mountain dulcimer. Mountain dulcimer, there's two basic kinds of dulcimer. There's a hammered dulcimer, which is a trapezoidal instrument with a ton of strings, and you play it with hammers, and it is the dulcimer referred to in the Bible. It's an ancient instrument. This is a lot more recent, a few hundred years old. They think that the closest thing resembling this was brought by Scandinavians when they came to this country.
And what is the other string instrument you're playing? One you do like
That's an autoharp. That's an autoharp, an automatic harp made from a zither, an instrument with lots and lots of strings, and it was nicknamed the Idiot Zither when it was first sold by Montgomery Ward because you press buttons to get the chords. So it's really easy to play. It's a devil to tune, but it's easy to play. Well, here's one more song on this, and It's a beautiful old mountain song called The Devil's 9 Questions, also a very nice song to sing along with. About an old belief in answering riddles from the devil. And what is heavier than the lead? Sing 99 and 90. And what is better than the bread? And the crow flies over the white oak tree. Well, grief is heavier than the lead. Sing 99 and 90. God's love is better than the bread. And the crow flies over the white oak tree. Well, you have answered my questions 9. Sing 99 and 90. And you are God's, you're none of mine. And the crow flies over the white oak tree. All right. We think of the culture and the people of this southeastern part of the United States as the Americans, not the immigrants. The immigrants are somebody else, but of course that's false, because the only people who were here were the Native Americans, and the rest of our ancestors all immigrated from someplace else. We draw so many distinctions between people, and my grandparents were immigrants, three-fourths of them from Russia, in fact from Minsk, which is now part of Belarus. And they were Jewish, and they came for fear of their lives because they were being persecuted and killed. And like many, many people, they found safe haven here in the United States. They escaped death and hardship to come to the United States. And like everybody who's come here, they brought a rich heritage of folklore. I have volumes and volumes of Jewish folk tales. And probably the ones that people hear the most are the ones about the people of Chelm. Has anybody ever heard a story about the people of Chelm? They say there is a real village in Poland called Chelm, but there's also a mythical village. They say that when the angels were passing over Chelm, you see, they usually deposited one fool in each village, and something happened and they slipped and they dropped the whole bunch of fools all down in the village of Chelm. And so it's a village of fools. And the most foolish of all of them are the town elders, who think they're the wisest. Now, the head of the town elders felt like he deserved something to show that he was the wisest man in Chelm. And so he decided one day that he wanted to have a pair of gold shoes. People could see him and they could show him the proper respect as they saw him walking about in his gold shoes. And so he had the shoemaker make him a pair of gold shoes, and he wore them proudly for about 30 seconds until they were all covered with mud. And then nobody could see the gold shoes. He brought the elders together, he brought the wise men together, and they talked about this, and they decided that what he should do is have a pair of brown leather shoes built on top of the gold shoes so that they wouldn't get muddy. And that he did, but it just took him about 15 seconds to realize that you couldn't see the gold shoes anymore. Well, they came back together and they discussed the matter, and they decided that what they could do is they could put holes in just the leather shoes so that people could see through the leather shoes to the golden shoes. And they did that, but pretty soon the holes were filled up with mud and you couldn't see anything. It was very discouraging. But somebody came up with an idea. They said, wear the shoes on your hands. And so that's what he did. From that time on, the wise man of Chelm walked around the city streets with his golden shoes on his hands, and everybody knew that he was the wise man of Chelm. But there's a more serious story that I like to tell called challah in the ark. Challah is the bread that is braided. It's delicious. My grandmother used to make it for us. And it's holy bread. It's bread that's especially made on the Sabbath, which is a Saturday for the Jewish people. And it takes place in the historical period after the Jews were expelled from Spain. The Jews were expelled from Spain in the beginning of the 1600s. All of them sent out, and they went all over Europe. Some went to England, some went to France, some went to Salonika in Greece, and some went to the Holy Land. Now, among them was Jacobi. Jacobi was a round man. He had a round face, a round body. He was a kindly man. But what people remarked about Jacobi above all else was that he was devout. He would go to the synagogue every Sabbath, and he would sit and he would listen to the rabbi. He would screw up his ears and he would listen to catch every word. And that was strange because Jacobi only spoke Spanish and the rabbi spoke Hebrew. But he got what he could. In one sermon, he listened and he thought he understood. It was a sermon about loaves of bread being left in the ark for God. And he came back, he understood bread, he understood God. He said to his wife, he said, Esperanza, he said, guess what? God eats bread. And you, Esperanza, are the best baker in the country. Make this week pan de Dios, and I will bring it to the temple, and I'll leave it in the holy ark for God. Oh, Esperanza worked all week baking bread for God. She put in the best ingredients. She put in her best intentions. She braided that bread with such love. And on the early morning of the Sabbath, Jacobi took it to the temple, and he stood before the ark, proud but humble, and he said, God, I brought you your bread. My wife, Esperanza, she made it. I know you'll love it. She's the best baker in the country. You'll enjoy every crumb. And he put in the ark, he put in 12 loaves of bread. 2 for the Sabbath meal, 2 for the second meal, 2 for the third, and 1 for each day of the week. And then he turned and he left. Well, a few minutes later, into the temple came the shamus. The shamus, the caretaker of the temple. And he stood before the holy ark. He said, God, he said, you know I want to work here. I love to be in your presence. I want to be in your temple, but I've been working for 7 weeks and I haven't been paid. I need you to do something. Maybe you can make a miracle. Maybe you've already made a miracle. Maybe I'll open this drawer and I'll find a miracle. And he opened the drawer and there was his miracle. 12 loaves of bread. 2 for the Sabbath meal, 2 for the second, 2 for the third, and 1 for each day of the week. He was ecstatic. He took the food home to his family and they ate well. And when Jacobi came back to look and he saw that the bread was gone, he went back and told Esperanza, he said, Esperanza, God has accepted your bread. God has accepted your bread. And she made it again. Next week he brought it and he left it in the holy ark. And the shamus came and he found the bread in the holy ark and he fed his family. And on it went, week after week, month after month, year after year. For 30 years, Esperanza baked bread of God, pan de Dios, and Jacobi took it to the temple. 30 years later, one morning, he stood before the holy ark and he said, God, he said, I know your bread's been a little lumpy lately. It's Esperanza, it's her arthritis. Maybe you can do something. You'll eat better. And he turned to leave, and the was right there. He was listening, and he grabbed him. He said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm bringing Esperanza. I'm bringing God his bread. God doesn't eat bread. He's been eating Esperanza's bread for 30 years. Ah, said the, and just then he heard the noise of the shamus coming into the temple. And they both hid because he wanted to find out what was going on. He wanted to get to the bottom of this. And in came the shamus, and he stood there and he said, "God, I hate to mention it, but your bread has been a little lumpy lately. Maybe you could talk to some of the angels. They'll give you some advice." He opened the ark to get his bread, and the rabbi jumped out. He started shouting at him. He started shouting at the shamus. He started shouting at Jacoby. He was shouting so hard he started to cry, and all three of them started to cry. "You're sinners," he said. "This is a terrible thing." Well, they heard some laughter in the back. It was the great mystic of Sfat, a wise man named Isaac Lurie. And he laughed. He said, "Rabbi, these men are not sinners. These men are devout. These men are devout," he said. "You've got to know that God and his angels have never had a better time than watching what happens in your temple. Every Sabbath, this one brings the bread and that one takes the bread. And he gets all the credit." He said, "Rabbi, these men are devout. You must ask these men for forgiveness." And Jacoby, he said, "You must do something even more difficult." He said, "Jacoby, you must bring the bread directly to the shamus and believe with absolute faith that God will be just as pleased and have just as much fun." Well, let me see here. Maybe do a couple more things. Are you up for a couple more things? All right, let me see here. Well, I was very fortunate in growing up that my parents knew well their history, and they knew about the terrible things that prejudice can do. They knew all about the Holocaust, and my father knew that he could not get jobs as a Jewish man that would be given to many other people. And they always impressed upon me to do the golden rule, to treat others as I wanted to be treated. They heard about a man named Cesar Chavez. Raise your hand if you know who that is. Cesar Chavez, a few of you. He was a labor organizer. His grandfather came from Mexico, and he helped organize the farm workers, who are mainly undocumented immigrants who raise the food and pick the food, most of the vegetables that we eat and buy, and it's back-breaking labor. And they were treated terribly, still are, but they were treated much worse, working long, long hours with short-handled hoes about this long, because the work went quicker with them, but within a few years your back was completely ruined. Breathing pesticides that were sprayed in the fields that would make them sick, all for terrible wages. And while unions were allowed for many other places in the country, they were not allowed in the fields. And so he, in 1962, formed the United Farm Workers of America, and they fought many years, fought very, very hard to earn better rights. And one time, to get people's attention, they had a 300-mile pilgrimage from where they were all the way up to Sacramento to get people's attention. And it did. And just as in the civil rights movement, reporters came and they began to hear the story of how they lived and worked and tell people around the world what was happening. And he received many allies. The strike that they were running ran into lots of problems because the the owners brought in strike breakers, and so they decided to bring in boycotts and then inspire other people around the United States. They sent people all around the country to different cities and even across to Europe, explaining their story and asking people not to buy grapes. We didn't eat grapes for about 5 years, all during that boycott in my home in New York. Well, this is a little story, a song written by a woman named Tish Hinojosa. It's kind of like historical fiction. It's not a real person she's describing. It's a person made up of many real persons and their stories. A story about a boy, maybe 10, 12 years old, whose little sister is dying of pesticide poisoning. In the first half of the song, he doesn't understand what's happening. People tell him it's because of something in the rain that she's sick. And in the second half, he kind of begins to understand what's happening. Sounds like maybe the fields were being organized around where he was, and he starts to think, well, maybe there's a way to deal with this. It goes like this. Mom and Dad had worked these fields, I don't know how many years. I'm just a boy, but I know how. And go to school and work is slow. We have seen our country's roads, from Bakersfield to Illinois. And when trouble comes our way, oh yeah, I've seen my daddy pray. There's something wrong with little sister, I hear her crying by my side. Mama's shaking as she holds her. We try to hold her through the night. Mom says, close your eyes, mijito. Dream of someplace far from here, like the pictures in your school books. Someday you can take us there. There must be something in the rain. I'm not sure just what that means. I'm willing to talk of sins of men and us that's in our hands. There must be something in the rain. Oh, what else could cause this pain? Those airplanes cure the plants so things can grow. Oh no, there must be something in the rain. Well, you all have been a wonderful audience. I have greatly enjoyed singing for you and telling you stories, and I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared with you. There's a favorite song I like to finish concerts with. I always enjoyed it, but now that I'm about to turn 75 in a couple of weeks, I especially enjoy it, and I trust you will. It's called How Do I Know My Youth Is All Spent? My get up and go has got up and went. But in spite of it all, I'm able to grin and to think of the places my get up has been. So I'd like to kind of go out on this one. Chorus goes like this. How do I know my youth is all spent? My get up and go has got up and went. But in spite of it all, I'm able to grin and to think of the places my get up has been. Join me next time around. Old age is golden, so I've heard said, but often I wonder as I crawl into bed, with my ears in a drawer, my teeth in a cup, my eyes on the table until I wake up. Here's my favorite verse. I get up each morning and dust off my wits. I pick up the paper and read the obits. If I'm not there, I know I'm not dead. So I eat a good breakfast and go back to bed. How do I know my youth is all spent? My get up and go has got up and went, but in spite of it all, I'm able to grin and to think of the places my get up has been. Thank you all.